Well, I'm not an expert in policy. I'm a physicist, and and I work in areas that are considered complexity science. I would say that in terms of its potential impact on policy, it's really to provide a complementary way of thinking about a problem. Because what complexity teaches you is that everything is interconnected, it's very dangerous always to just try to put a boundary around a specific problem. So, for example, in formulating a policy about energy, one has to recognize that energy is dominated by questions of what happens in the development of cities. The fact that China's building 300 new cities in the next 20 years, that is obviously connected somehow to the question of the availability of energy and resources and so on. It's obviously connected, needless to say, to the economy. And so all of these things are highly interrelated and interconnected. And I think, to put it sort of in its minimal form, it helps one not only formulate the problem, but in terms of minimizing unintended consequences. Because one of the things one quickly realizes, and I must say this workshop is a good example, is that when you start thinking only in terms of stovepiping a problem, you're not realizing that it is connected, you always have effects on many other things. So it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking. And also, by the way, the other aspect of it is that it helps one think about the fact that there are many scales in the problem, both temporal, that is, things that happen on a very short time scale, things that happen on a very long time scale, but also spatial, things that happen locally, things that happen globally, and to see all those as interrelated, not just among the spatial aspects, not only among the temporal, but among the spatio-temporal. And so it develops a way of thinking which I think could be important for policy and for kind of questions of international relations, for example. Well, yes, the question is my work about complexity. So in terms of my own history, I'm a physicist, and the work that I've spent most of my career doing is the very opposite to complexity. Physics is the subject of simplicity, actually. And I worked in something called high energy physics, quarks and gluons and dark matter and string theory and so forth. Pardon me. And my work in complexity started because I started thinking about some big questions, fundamental questions in biology. So in the most simple terms, it's, in what way is an elephant just a great big mouse, for example? To recognize that the underlying complexity, by asking such questions, underlying complexity and the incredible challenges where, when you look out of the window and you see an ecosystem, you see a forest, and then it all looks so complicated and so on. Underlying it is in fact a fantastic simplicity, it turns out. That is that if you ask this question, is an elephant a scaled up mouse, you discover that it is actually till some 80, 90% level. And but the scaling is nonlinear. And the nonlinearity arises because most of our physiology and most of our life history means, how long are we going to live, how many children do we have, et cetera, all of these are constrained and to a large extent determined by the fact that we are network systems, that we are in fact networks. I mean, the ones obvious ones are like your circulatory system, but there's your renal system and your neural system and so on. But all these are hierarchical networks, and they are highly systemic in their quality. And putting that into mathematics, one is able to understand that underlying the structure around us, which looks so diverse and so variegated, that in fact, under that complexity are these very simple rules that are governing sort of on the average what is happening. So for example, if you tell me the size of some mammal, just to give you an example, I can tell you what the length of its aorta is, how many heartbeats it has, how many offspring it will have, how long it will live, how long it takes to mature, etc., etc. In the same way you give me the size of a city in some urban system, I will tell you how long all the roads are, how many patents it produces, how many AIDS cases it has, how many restaurants it has. These are all, roughly speaking, to the sort of 85, 90% level, determined. And it's amazing. And they're determined because these are, even though they are complex and adaptive, they evolve, but they evolve, and this is really crucial, because in some very coarse-grained, sort of coarse-grained meaning low-resolution way, they are optimizing something. You know, something is being optimized, and that's one of the big questions. What is it that, with this continuous feedback due to in over long periods of time in terms of natural selection processes, what is being optimized? So just to give you one example, mammals, we who have beating hearts and a circulatory system to keep us alive, we have evolved so that the amount of energy our heart has to do is about as small as it could possibly be, so that we don't spend our energy, our fundamental metabolic energy, keeping ourselves alive, because we want to maximize the amount of energy we can put into reproduction and raising our offspring. I was invited, of course, like many others, to participate in having a dialogue. This is my perception of it, of those of us that have grappled with complex systems and adaptive systems, whether in biology or the social sciences, and have a dialogue with economists, but in particular, economists like those associated with the OECD, who are very connected to policy. And this is so there are two levels, it seems to me, that are difficult, that are challenging, I should say. One is what can economics learn by thinking of economic systems and social systems from this framework of complexity. Having done that, having the next level, which is probably even more challenging, how do we put that into effective policy? And that's a very difficult question. I work, so my specific role is I have worked a great deal in some of these biological questions, but also in the last few years on developing a science of cities, asking, cities where the action is. The future of the planet is determined by the cities now. And there's a tremendous urgency, tremendous need for us to really understand what are the dynamics and organization of cities, and how do they play into the sustainability of the planet. So from where I come from, that translates into, we need to ask the question, can there be a science of cities? Can there be something that's quantitative and predictive, and that we can sort of, at least in this coarse-grained way, understand what their growth and evolution will be, and so forth. So that's what I work on. And one of the challenges of that relates to this is not just communicating that, but asking, how does that inform policy? How do we translate whatever we learn about the science of cities? And we have learned a great deal, and it's been quite astonishing, really. But how do we translate that into policy when you're running a city like Paris, and you've got to deal with, the questions of crime and the questions of the environment and the questions of keeping the roads working and so forth. So this is a huge issue, and so I think it's a wonderful meeting to have. I'm only disappointed, and I will say this, that there hasn't been more open discussion about some of these things. That would be my recommendation for any future follow-up, that we need more time to actually discuss, because we have a group of people here who come from very different backgrounds and we speak different languages. So discussion is equally, if not more important, than just listening to each of us speak.